Bill introduced at the State House calling for new protections to block undocumented migrants from receiving jobs unless they have legal documents that prove they are legally allowed to work in our state.
Western Mass News reporter Wesley Days listened to public testimony on the bill today and has more details. Wesley, we're hearing from people on both sides of the issue tonight.
We sure are, Chris and Abby, and we'll hear from them in just a few moments. Now, in the House, it's Bill 1866, and then in the Senate, it's 1169. Regardless of what they're called, though, they stand for some of the same things. Let's break it down. Those bills are pushing for companies across the Commonwealth to use an E-Verify program that ensures employees have the proper documents. That system is used jointly by the United States Department of Homeland Security and the Social Security Administration. Now, the legislation reads in part, quote, after hiring an employee, an employer shall verify the employment eligibility of the employee through the E-Verify program. No employer shall intentionally or knowingly employ an unauthorized alien. Now, that bill authorizes the Attorney General to create a complaint form for anyone to allege a company is in violation of the act. It also allows states that the AG or a district attorney cannot investigate claims based solely on race, color, or national origin. If a company is in violation of that act, the state would demand that company to terminate all unauthorized workers, and they'll have to comply with a 3-year probationary period where they would file quarterly reports with their district attorney spotlighting that they are adhering to this policy. They could also face business license suspensions. Now, if they're found in violation a second time, they could lose their licenses permanently. Now, tonight, we're hearing from both advocates and those who oppose the bill. We begin with supporters, though, who were able to express their opinion during today's public hearing in front of the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development. They say passing this bill would ensure authorized workers will remain the focus of the job hiring process.
A statewide E-Verify system would have 3 primary benefits. 1, by making it much more difficult to be hired illegally, it would discourage unauthorized workers from coming to Massachusetts. 2, it would level the playing field among employers and stop giving the competitive advantage to exploitive and dishonest employers who hire illegal workers.
Now, you just heard from Henry there. He also adds it would improve the wages of poor, lower skilled workers. Now, Western Mass News is also getting answers with Tara Parrish. She's the executive director of the Pioneer Valley Project. She tells us bills like these are harmful.
This particular piece of legislation, first of all, it's not likely to advance. I think it basically revisits some talking points that are divisive talking points. They're not honest assessments of what's actually happening, how changes in workforce participation are fueled by many, many different factors, but instead seek to sort of assign blame to migrants for taking away jobs from.
Abby, it's unclear what happens next with this bill. Parrish's organization, by the way, is actively working to help migrants here in the United States, right here in Springfield, apply for identification with the state. By the way, the bill also requires employers to register and participate in that E-Verify process in order to receive an economic development incentive from any government entity. Now, that's if that bill is passed. Reporting live in studio, Wesley Days, Western Mass News.